So for the past 2 years, I've been working out in Hollywood with and at major media companies behind the scenes and in the offices of the world, which makes the content you glue your eyes to every day. When I tell people that, they imagine me striding down the red carpet with lights and cameras flashing everywhere. But in reality, it was a lot of getting coffee for people, organizing a supply closet, and staring up in awe at a bunch of movie posters. But when people ask me why I want to go into this industry, I have two reasons. The first one is obvious. I am obsessed with movies and TV. I probably couldn't list out all 50 United States if you wanted, but I could give you the entire fictional history of all the superhero universes. And in fact, in middle school, I made this picture of me lying down on all of my DVD collection. Fantastic. And to prove my superhero thing, here's a chart I made to explain all the universes. So obsessed, yes. But I try to ask myself, what is it about these narratives that gets me so excited? Why is it that I stay up late at night reading movie analyses and procrastinating and not doing my homework? For me, it's about the chance to dive into a whole new reality. When I'm watching The Avengers, I'm not sitting there passively as Earth's mightiest heroes are fighting aliens. I'm there because I feel like I'm there with them in New York on the ground as this is happening around me. As much as we love bashing Michael Bay's Transformers series, the reason why they're so popular is because they're so good at making us feel like these giant robots are fighting the battle for humanity right in our city. We watch these stories to immerse ourselves in the world of the characters on screen. And to do that, we map a level of truth onto their narratives. This is fun, this is exciting, that's why we do it. But I worry that it isn't necessarily harmless. In addition to being a cinephile, I'm also an American Muslim, as evidenced by this picture of me in a hijab. Fun fact, I made the news that day. But anyway, my Muslim identity puts me in a very unique position when I watch some of the things that I watch. Because as it so happens, there is no dearth of Muslim characters on screen. There are a lot. The problem is that they're all terrorists, murderers, sociopaths, and criminals. And I think they kind of look like me. What do you guys think? Here's a side-by-side for comparison. I'm not going to bother you all with the data on how the vast majority of Muslims are decent, non-homicidal human beings, because I'm sure you know all that. But my question is, when we're presented with a compelling piece of fiction, and it includes a factually inaccurate, negative depiction of a Muslim, and then we map a level of truth onto that depiction because we are so invested in the story, how good are we, after that, at separating the fact from the fiction? I believe we suck at it. It's not wholly our fault because the trends in the entertainment industry make it so hard for us. Let's look at some of those trends. Firstly, it's not like the depictions on screen show us Muslims who just happen to be bad by coincidence. Let's take, for example, Homeland's Nicholas Brody. He's a US Marine who just returned from war, and people aren't entirely sure if they can trust him. But then, in one shocking scene, it is revealed that Brody is praying like a Muslim in his garage, meaning he converted to Islam while in Afghanistan. Now, as Professor James Kostanagwai tells us, this twist is only shocking because his Islamic turn is represented as a prerequisite in his becoming a terrorist. Meaning, as soon as we learn this about him, we are meant to map onto him this violent disposition. And this largely becomes the most salient part of his character, and audiences are meant to constantly feel wary about this terrifying Muslim label. This mode of depicting Muslims as, by definition, terrorists is widespread in popular media shows such as 24, Sleeper Cell, and even shows that don't directly relate to terrorism, like Lie to Me. In this last example, in one episode, even after the entire mystery of the plot was resolved, the story never bothered to give us any rational motive for the Muslim bomber's attempted crime because we were meant to map onto him this Islamic jihadist mind frame. This was supposed to be obvious, and as very few people questioned it, it seems like it was. Another problem we have is the conflation of the Muslim identity into this one homogeneous blob. As religious scholar Amr Hussain tells us, the international body of Muslims consists of South Asians, Arabs, Iranians, African Americans, Latinos, East Asians, and whites. So it should be literally impossible with this much diversity to point out a person who looks Muslim. And yet entertainment doing this is very much possible. Professor Evelyn El-Sultani tells us that the Arab on screen has distinctive dark features, a hook nose, and is further visually distinguished by clothing. And so the Muslim identity held by over 1 billion people around the world is being boiled down to this one Arab caricature. Weirdly, this conflation of other races in the Arab Muslim caricature has been administered so well that it's now possible to dress an actor of any race for the role. Let's take some examples from 24. Here we have the terrifying Afghani Muslim terrorist Syed Ali, but he is of course played by Italian-American actor Francesco Quinn. Then we have the scary Turkish terrorist Habib Marwan, played by South African-American actor Arnold Vosloo. And then we have a generic Arab terrorist, Navi Araz, but is he played by an Arab actor? Of course not. Played by Puerto Rican-American Nestor Serrano. So yeah, this is a very common thing that happens in our media. And when conflation is so rampant in this way, what will stop people from allowing themselves to separate the fact from fiction after the credits roll? Not much does. If we look at the show Sleeper Cell, we find that this conflation has been administered so well that even the show's own creators mix up their characters' races. Recorded interviews have them calling their Pakistani character an archetypal Middle Eastern father and calling their Persian actor Arab, both being, of course, wrong. Now, fine. There are a lot of inaccuracies with how Muslims are presented on screen, sure. But why do we care? Why does this matter? Again, we know that this is fiction. We know it's not real. So how could any of this be harmful? A common critique against this movement for better representation on screen is that entertainment is just that, entertainment. It doesn't need to be taken seriously, and we shouldn't be getting so caught up over it and doing things like writing TEDx talks about it. But anyway. And that's to prove to you that the things you watch actually do have an impact on you. Because when we see these narratives as so emotionally real, it's hard for us to not let that seep into our understandings of reality. Professors Francis Henry and Carol Tatter explained that media represents one of the most powerful institutions in a democratic society because they help transmit its central cultural images, ideas, and symbols, as well as the nation's narratives and myths. This idea that television and media can profoundly affect people's perceptions is called cultivation theory. And there's a lot of research to back it. One study of note by Professors James Potter and I.K. Chang shows that television has a substantial impact on attitude formation and constructions of reality among middle school students. Middle schools. I mean, do you guys remember what you were like in middle school? This was me in middle school. And so that means at this age, two things are happening. One, these kids are developing acne, and two, if they watch the shows and movies that I've been talking about, they're growing these homogenized views of Muslims that will later be very difficult to overturn. Shows like Homeland know all this, and they use it to their advantage. James Kasangwai describes the show by saying it employs a paranoid style in which they replay the trauma of 9/11 weekly to keep the image fresh in the audience's memory. In fact, the opening credits of the show open by running through news clips of real terror attacks in America's history. The show opens by conflating fact and fiction, and crucially, it keeps Muslims front and center while doing that. So, if this is what's happening, how are audiences meant to separate the fact from fiction after the show ends? Not much is there to help them. Now, some showrunners still deny these effects of media. An executive producer of Homeland, Joel Cerno, states that he doesn't believe that adult behavior is shaped by watching a television show. Well, I wonder if he is aware that according to CBS News, The Independent, and court testimonials, West Point students, lawmakers, government officials, and even a US Supreme Court justice have all cited scenes from 24 when arguing for why torture was acceptable. These are examples of adult behavior in action being based on a fictional narrative, and that being used to justify why human rights should be denied to certain people. That should terrify us, but it's also not that new, because we saw a similar thing happen after the release of the movie Jaws. Because after that movie became popular, despite the fact that sharks statistically pose a tiny threat to human life, the fear of sharks and a desire to kill them off spiked. So what does it mean now that we see the same sort of trend beginning now for the Muslim identity? I didn't notice at first how much these movies and shows were vilifying Muslims. But as I kept watching and as I got older, it slowly became more explicit, and so did its effect on me. Not too long ago, I was going in to do one of my daily Muslim prayers, And in the process, I realized I felt strange. And upon reflection, I realized that I felt strange because I was feeling guilty. Guilty not because I had done anything wrong, but because just the week before, I had seen a terrorist on television praying the exact same way I was praying now. And I found this really horrifying, that if even I, someone who's seen the beauty of the Muslim community, who's seen the love, the connections, the bond, if even I could be swayed to hold on to a negative conception of a Muslim after watching a couple hours of people saying some lines in funny costumes, then what must be happening in the minds of general audiences? Recently, I had the honor of meeting Riz Ahmed, one of the few prominent Muslim working actors today. When I asked him why he wanted to go into this industry, he emphasized how he wanted to see more characters who looked like him but were not caricatures. This is what I want too. I want to help this industry, which we all love so much, finally get up to speed with how the world looks and acts today. Look, I don't believe that the full diversity and nuance of a group of people can ever be depicted on a television show or a movie, but that's not what necessarily needs to be done. As sociologist Stuart Hall says of the television depiction of African Americans, what is at issue here is the recognition of the extraordinary diversity of subject positions, social experiences, and cultural identities which constitute the category Black. That is the only resolution that is needed then. The Muslim identity, with all of its nuance and difference, need only to be fully recognized. That casts it all as valid and legitimate. And I know all that is easier said than done, but only after this is done will we avoid the homogenization of Muslims. And I actually do think we've made some progress here. The Gay and Lesbian Alliance Against Defamation's recent report finds that within the last 10 years, the number of LGBT-identifying characters on screen has doubled. Also, this coming year, it's found that 20% of recurring characters on TV will be Black. I'm not saying this means we've entered this new era of positive representation on screen, but I do think that the ground is ripe for change. But why? Why are executives slowly becoming more conscious of this? I believe it's because we're finally demanding it. So I want to urge on you all a new concept. We have so far been putting the onus on the entertainment industry, talking about how they must fix their representation of minorities on screen. But to a large extent, the fault is also ours. We as an audience, American and global, have consistently supported entertainment that is not positively diverse. And so from a studio perspective, changing form for more honest and nuanced representations represents a substantial risk. And I'm part of that problem too. For all the love I have of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, I can't deny that 3 of its franchises are led by white dudes named Chris. For all the bashing I did of 24 and Homeland today, I was only able to talk about them because I'm a huge fan of the shows. But if this doesn't change, the lesson that executives will get is that not only does marginalization of minorities work, but that it is extremely profitable. I want us to come to a new understanding of how we evaluate our entertainment. We can love a movie like American Sniper for its amazing acting, direction, production, all of that, but at the same time, we must condemn it for its simplistic and vilifying depiction of Muslims. We can praise Back to the Future as a great American classic, but we must detest that scene where our protagonists are being chased down by crazy Libyan terrorists. If we do this, then we are telling the industry that representation, proper representation, matters to us. And we see this industry as this gigantic, untouchable monster, but we forget that they can be crippled down to the ground if we just look away. They are bound by our attention or the lack thereof. And that is a lot of power. And so if we really, truly care about this, we can make it known. In conclusion, watch responsibly. Thank you.